So said this is the seventh webinar we have in the Ulster J Club Coach Development Programme. We have touched on athletic development a few weeks ago in terms of the fundamental movement skills. And we're moving into maybe more so now athletic development for the youth player. Our next webinar is on the 26th of May. And Anthony Harkin and Brendan Harper will be covering that. So if you're interested in coaching the skill of working of the ball, go onto the Ulster GA Facebook page and their Eventbrite page, and you can register for that on the 26th of May. Okay, so what we're going to be covering this evening is just a whole range of athletic development when it comes to particularly the teenage age. So we're going to look at what is athletic development, what's the various parts in it, what's involved, age groups, male and female. We'll look at some of the different types of multi-sport and multi-movement patterns, which is essential for playing sports, and particularly developing those from a young age up until the elite level. We'll look at how we coach fundamental movement patterns, how you do that in your daily coaching sessions, and how you plan for that, and use progression from weeks and the following months ahead. We'll touch a wee bit on peak height velocity, and if anybody doesn't really know what that is, it's really just your biological maturation, and how the different people between male and female, how they progress, and how it kind of differs, and what you really need to be focusing on at the certain areas of development. And then just touching on how we're going to develop some of these things into your coaching sessions based on what we were talking about here in our movement patterns. So when we talk about athletic development, here's a quote or a definition that Bern Gambetta has used. And it's fairly renowned now that athletic development is a holistic approach where you're taking lots of different elements of physical performance into incorporation to develop athletic potential throughout a long career. So his definition he would use would be a systematic, sequential and progressive development of all athletic qualities in an integrated manner to develop the complete athlete. It incorporates a balanced development of all components of physical performance: strength, power, speed, agility, endurance and flexibility. So it's a whole host of different physical attributes that we need to take into account, not just for, a lot of these kind of terms like strength and power and speed would maybe become very applicable to senior level, but when we actually strip it back, a lot of the basics and the fundamentals for those need to be implemented at a good age, not just at the fundamentals age, but right through the athletic development career. And if those aren't touched upon, then we're kind of limiting the athletic potential that we can get as an end product or an end athlete. So I'm sure you coaches have probably been familiar with this player pathway in previous years. It's been going now 10 years or more. Now, this is the previous player pathway where we would have had the different phases. So we had the Gaelic start, the fundamentals, the learn to train, train to train, train to compete, and train to win. And that was broken down into various different characteristics: your physical, your technical, your tactical. But this has kind of moved on now within the last couple of years, and it's kind of a bit more fluid in its approach, where we have overlapping areas, so players can drift in and drift out of different areas at different times of the year or different parts of their career. So if you can see the circles there, we've got F and T and E, and those basically stand for the foundation, the talent area and the elite level. So within the F, you have F1 and F2, which is primarily your fundamentals and your refining movement skills. So basically finding out, play, exercises, enjoying sport, getting fun involved, but also exploring the different types of movements that they can do. Okay, so just finding out like how they can jump and how they can land and what good positions and poor positions might feel like, and then you as a coach can refine that and educate them along their pathway. So once they come out of the F phase, then they're into the F2 phase. They're nearly into like this F3, which is nearly get into your underage club level. And F3 is really split into like a youth and adult phase. So some players might go into that F3 phase and stay there. They might play club football the rest of their life, and that's the area that they want to stay in or their potential of staying in. But other athletes or teenagers may drift into the T1 phase, which is where they demonstrate the potential for maybe getting to that elite level. So your T1 is really demonstrating the potentials, maybe going to your academy squad trials and stuff like that. So they maybe have been selected from their clubs then to represent or to go to a county trial. Then their T2 phase would be where they would maybe be selected to be on that squad. And then moving into the T3 phase, that's where they'd be probably practicing and achieving and playing regularly from under 14, 15, 16, 17, right up to under 20s. And then T4 is just at that under 20 age group where they have went through the whole process. They have the fundamental movement skills mastered at this stage, and then they're really focusing on elite sport specific skills, and then they're starting to drift into the inter-county phase. But as you can imagine, there's only a select few that will actually get to that level. And as you can see then again that these overlap, the T1s, the into the F model and then into the E category as well. Like so club players can be county players, and it's a bit more, as I say, fluid in its approach. So not an elite inter-county player won't always stay at that E1 phase. He may go back and drift into the F3 and then go back to E1 again. It just depends at times of the year as well. So just keeping that in mind, that this is the new player pathway and where your maybe players will fit in and where they might drift into at different stages of their GA career. So as I highlighted, the youth area is what we're looking at this evening, and that would incorporate anywhere in between, say, F2 right up to maybe T4. So it's at this stage they have mastered the fundamental movement skills. They're proficient in their movements, and the movement patterns, and now we're trying to steer them towards developing those athletic potentials and then into more sport specific sessions and programs. So athletic development we'll just do as a quick breakdown. So it's really, we're looking to examine fundamental movement patterns that underpin the sport. So if you're looking at the likes of GAA, hurling, football, you'd be looking at the likes of your jumping, your catching, your landing, your kicking, your jumping. So we're looking at all those types of things that happen in our game, and then we're stripping that back to say, well, what kind of movement patterns happen to let those skills end up develop? So what do they look like? Well, obviously there's going to be different types of movement patterns. You've got your squat patterns, your lunge patterns, you've got pushing, pulling, being able to hold your trunk stability. And then we're trying to develop how we coach these. All right, are you a kind of dictator coach? Do you let them discover for themselves? Do you give them, you know, internal or external cueing? And we'll touch a wee bit about that later on as well. And how external cueing is pretty good for developing even within the mind frame of the player, how they perceive what the exercise or technique should look like, and then how they can implement that better going forward. And as I said, just about exploring the different training methods that are on hand and how you might be able to develop these. But all in all, athletic development, the two main focuses that you're probably looking to get out of this is to reduce potential or future injury rates and maximise athletic potential. So all in all, I would always use the phrase that it is easier to build up strong children to fix broken adults. All right, so you'll find that once we get to the end phase or elite phase or senior level, you find out where injuries become a lot more prevalent, and that kind of goes back to if they're not proficient within their motor training and the movement capacity at a younger level. So the more we can build them up and develop that over a series of years, then hopefully in the later term will reduce the potential for injury. And coming inside that as well, if they're on the pitch for longer, they're spending less time watching training, less time injured, well then they're training at a higher level, they're playing at the higher levels for more longer, and as a result they should be able to maximise the potential that they play at, and hopefully the select few will get into that elite phase at some stage in their career. And I'll use this, I've used this in the fundamentals webinar as well. And I think it's very appropriate, that we should always be striving for good coordination and good movement efficiency before we try and develop too much of the strength, the speed, the explosiveness. Now, it's not saying that you shouldn't be developing strength or shouldn't be developing speed before anything else. Those should really go hand in hand, but the coordination and the movement will underpin how fast or how explosive you can actually be. If you're coordinating your movement in a correct way and you double that up with appropriate levels of good strength and force, well, then you're going to become a faster and a more explosive athlete. And on the flip side of that, if you have poor coordination through sprinting or through agility turns, well, then it doesn't matter how strong you are, you're still going to be losing out on that fully potential of becoming as fast and as explosive as you can. And obviously, the faster you are, the more explosive you are, the quicker you can accelerate, decelerate, and all in all, it's going to be more benefit to you when you take to the field to play or field sports. This is just a quick diagram which underpins some of the research that's been done by a guy called Rodri Lloyd, and he is kind of one of the main leaders in youth athletic development. He's done a lot of research into this area, and he's highlighted some of the main things to be focusing on at certain pinpoints of teenager or a child's career. As you see down the left-hand side, you get the various physical qualities. And the top of the list is the fundamental movement skills, which I touched on before. You have to have these embedded. And once you get to a teenage year, you nearly have these mastered, all right? So you'll be mastered at doing good running technique, good squat patterns, being able to move proficiently in a good way. And if you can do that, then everything else should be a lot easier as you go through the career. Strength, power, speed, agility, as I said before, a lot of people think maybe this doesn't really be appropriate until you get to maybe like a senior age group, whereas in hindsight, if you don't drop bits and pieces of these in at a child or an underage person's career, the potential for them to actually develop this to the best of their ability is actually quite diminished once you get to the end stage. So it's very important that you have to keep an eye that they're implementing certain types of speed and strength and power and agility into your weekly training sessions. And a lot of the time that comes back to, is it a fun environment? Are you going to set players up at 10, 11, 12 and make them do straight line sprints? Or would it be more fun for them to do catching games, tagging games, agility games, where in hindsight, it's actually going to be more beneficial, and a lot of young players don't really get up to that top level speed unless you enter in some sort of competition into it. So for example, if you have like a tag game where somebody's chasing you, they will actually produce more force and actually become a lot faster than if you just tell them to run, say, for 50, 60 meters as fast as they can. But you put somebody else beside them at a 50, 60 meter pace, more often than not, they're going to get that slight bit faster anyway and reach that top level speed. So if they're getting that exposure to top level speed at a younger age, as I say, that potential for that to develop that once they get past puberty will be heightened again. Just as some of the other points that he's touched on as well, was the different age periods we have to be aware of. So obviously early childhood, middle childhood and adolescence. And within those factors, you've got to think about the growth rates that are happening within around that time as well. So as you know, like the kids will, within the first few years, will have that rapid growth rate where they're starting to grow really fast in a short space of time. And then the growth rate will stay fairly consistent between that 5 to 11 years. And then when the onset of puberty happens, the growth spurt kicks in again. Longer limbs start to happen. Hormones within males and females then will start to drive the training adaptations, which happens as well. So we need to be mindful of that, that we're prescribing, and we know that how bodies are going to be adapting rather than just training kids all as normal as you would have done maybe whenever they were underage, or whether, for example, if they were at the fundamental age group. We need to be able to take into account that if longer limbs are happening at a certain age grade, well, then is there potential for increased injury? And we'll talk a wee bit about that in the further slides as we go on. So just something to keep in mind, and the next couple of slides will probably develop that even further. This is the male youth physical development model. And as you can see along the top, this is something that we would probably be fairly aware of, right? You've got your underage groups, under 6, under 8, under 10 or 12, or whatever it might be. So we're kind of gauging where our children or teenagers are at by chronological years. But in hindsight, and what probably happened in a lot of other sports is something called bio-banding, where teams and coaches are actually selecting children and teenagers at different biological ages rather than chronological ages, and prescribing various sessions depending on the physical ability of the child at that age. So as you can see, just this is the male physical development model, and we have different maturational statuses, and between the ages of, say, roughly 11 to 14, that's where the males will have obviously their growth spurt, they reach puberty. There's a lot more hormones coming in around that time, and this filters down along with the different physical qualities that needs to be worked on at that certain time as well. So if we just scoot down here to the physical qualities on the left-hand side, you can see the first few is the functional movement skills, and I'll just highlight that the higher the font, the bigger the font is, the more importance it needs to have at that certain age group, and the smaller the font is probably the less amount of response that we need to have at that age group, or the less kind of adaptation which will happen at that age group. So if we're thinking about functional movement, as you can see, the ages between 2 and, say, 9 to 10, there's a massive, there needs to be a huge emphasis on functional movement at that age. Once you get past that growth spurt area, the potential for you to change after that isn't as high as it would be in the younger age groups. The SSS stands for the sport-specific skills. And as you can see, in the younger age group, the sport-specific skills aren't as important. But as the career and the athlete adapts and their body starts to change, that's when the sport-specific skills become more and more important. Whereas probably years ago, before any of this kind of information would have become available, it probably would have been the opposite way about. We would have put more emphasis on our younger youth doing lots of sport-specific skills and doing very little movement or functional movement, and then coming towards the end of the career, we'd have been placing more emphasis on functional movement, whereas in the hindsight, that needs to be changed, and we need to put more of an emphasis on the functional movement at the start and sport-specific skills towards the end. As you can see, mobility stays fairly continuous right way through the career. Agility, speed, power, and strength all have a key area to play within that ages of 5 to about 16. Primarily, once the growth spurt starts and the hormones begin to start and the limb length begins to get longer, that's when the adaptation for agility, speed, and power and strength can be at its best. So we need to take that into account. We're doing dropping in different elements of agility, speed, and power and strength all the way through the career. And then if, just for example, there's none of these that would not be appropriate at any time. They're all appropriate, but it's just the type and the amount that you expose them to at that certain time. So just because of the smaller writing doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It just needs to be done in smaller doses, whereas the bigger writing there would indicate that you need to do it at a bit more of a higher dose. And strength, as you can see, it's shown to be, sorry, I just put it back again. Shown to have great benefits, not only for long-term health, but for the potential for the strength to develop power, to develop speed in later years. And strength doesn't always equate to lifting heavy weights all the time. You know, there's different types of strength. There's isometric strength, where they may be holding their own body weight. They may be doing body weight squats, body weight lunges, etc. And that strength may be developed into like lifting extra load. Okay, so we all would kind of attribute the strength with lifting weights. But also on top of that, there's different elements of strength in terms of your reactive strength, which is your jumping height, jumping power. So you think the amount of kids at such a young age, they do loads of jumping. They should be doing loads of jumping. They should be out playing, jumping off, fences like we used to do years ago. There should be lots of, and some of the best Gaelic footballers that I've seen within the last number of years are guys who either do a lot of athletics, high jumps, long jumps, hurdles, or are good Irish dancers. Okay, so they're doing lots of reactive type strengthening exercises. So keeping that in mind, it's good to have good doses of strength implemented in at different age groups, but it just all depends on the type of strength. And it depends on obviously the dose that you're giving them as well. Hypertrophy, which is actually the muscle size or potential for muscle size, is actually quite low until they get to that stage of puberty. And then after that, when testosterone and growth hormone starts to get higher, that's when the potential comes in for more muscle mass to be developed. And as you can see here, like the endurance phase, endurance doesn't really take a massive benefit until, or change until 17, the age of 16, 17 roughly. Although I do know of a lot of clubs, a lot of coaches who will maybe place an emphasis on doing lots of long distance endurance running, but some of the research is saying it doesn't have a huge impact on how the aerobic capacity can be developed at a later age in the year. So we just need to take that into mind, that we're not doing too much of high dose of endurance running at such a young age, and leave that to later on in the career as well. And obviously the training structure, as I say, like the younger age group will become very unstructured, whereas the higher age group will be very, very high structured. So the plans and the programs, the intensities, the loads, the volumes would need to be very, very managed. Whereas at such a young age, we're at such a low load, low volume, low intensity, it's more of a play and getting them to nearly find out their movements for themselves, discovery learning, how they move, jumping, landing, all of those types of things. So some of the best sessions I've done as a schools coach has been like unstructured sessions where we maybe focus on, say, jumping, it's a type of reactive strength, and we would say like, how many ways can you jump? How many types of jumps is there? Can you show me as many different types of jumping? And within that, it's unstructured. They're discovering, they're trying it out, they're finding out for themselves what works best, and they're enjoying it. And there's a lot of play involved in that too. So that's one of the key themes that needs to carry across right the way through, is that there's good levels of fun and enjoyment, because they don't enjoy it, they don't have fun. Well, then once they come to the later end of the career, that's where you could start to find a lot of drop-offs. So try and always implement that wee bit of element of fun and enjoyment into all of the sessions. So we're just talking about this kind of physical development model. There's just a few changes between the male and the female. As you know, females will probably go through that area of puberty just a couple of years earlier. But as we flick across between the male and the female, nearly all of the physical qualities happen at roughly the same time as the puberty happens. All right. So if it's a couple of years before with the girls, well, then everything nearly shifts back. The potential for developing agility, speed, power, and strength should be shifted back to coincide with that period of puberty. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, if you have any questions about this at all, yeah, just put it into the chat box and I'll try and answer that as much as possible as we go through. Sean's come in there with a question: as GAA coaches can do more to improve functional movement, such as running techniques? We do observe limitations, but it's hard to change, or we may ignore it. And I totally agree, Sean. I think that's a key point. When we're talking about functional movement, squat patterns, lunge patterns. For me, one of the main things I would try and do would be implement functional movements in my warm-ups. And I would do that a lot with the underage groups or with the fundamentals. You may have a fundamental lesson, or you might have fundamental classes like a lot of clubs do at the minute. But the thing is that a lot of people drop off the fundamentals. They get to the football, they get to the hurling games or the go games, and then it's just straight into sports, and then nearly forgot about the fundamental functional movement skills. So one thing we have to do and kind of strip back is, are we preparing them for the best movement quality as we can, rather than thinking, are we able to fist pass the ball over the bar from 20 meters, or are we able to kick the ball over the bar with our left foot from 30 meters? Okay, so keeping in mind, look, running, jumping, landing, all those fundamental movement skills really need to be honed in. And as coaches, we have a duty of care to those, because if we're thinking about the end product, essentially that's what everybody wants to do at a young age. Or as a young coach, you want to be able to develop that potential, not just for having the output at that certain area of time. Like, everybody likes to have success, but are you going to give up success for focusing on sports specific skills at a too early an age to try and win competitions? Or are you seeing the bigger picture, that you want that player playing for your senior club team or your senior county team once they get to the age of 18, 19, 20? So yeah, we do have a duty of care, I think, and we do need to spot and fix, just like you do within your coaching sessions. If you see something like a fist pass that's gone wrong, or something that's maybe from a skill point of view, you would spot and fix that. You would turn around and say, well, this is what you might have to do, or how does that feel if you do it this way? So yeah, running technique, jumping, landing, try and do all of those things, and observe and spot and fix as much as possible. And if we are ignore it, well, then that's again thinking about the end product. Do you have that duty of care to that player for that length of career that they're going to have? Because essentially, I think that's the way things need to go. We need to be more focused on our athletic development within this period of time, because if it's not focused on now, you end up losing it, or the potential for maximising it at a later time is gone. So just thinking about our early development, I talked about the sports specific skills. I know myself 15 years ago, I was, I probably would have went the other way. I would have been more sports specific and less than fundamental movements, and I'd be thinking we do that at maybe 16 or 18. Whereas the early development, the sports specific skills, really, like, it doesn't need to be completely forgot about it, but the fundamental movements need to be priority at that stage, and making sure they're moving efficiently before we're doing too much sports specific stuff. And that comes back to exposing your kids, exposing your teenagers to being in a multi-sport environment. And we can all think of that one, prodigy that we've all had within our clubs. One player who has had the best skill set. He was the one that everybody was talking about through the club. We only played football, and he was going to be the next big thing. Yet, the potential for him to develop, because he's focused on too much sports specific skills too young, and hasn't developed a full range of movement and a full skill set. He becomes a very limited player once he gets to that senior age grade. And I can think of one player that just comes to mind, who his father, had came to me within the club and mentioned, his skills were just starting up. Like, this guy was maybe about 12 years of age, and he was having real trouble because the rest of the fellas in his class were, seemed to be a lot more skillful than him at that stage. And he had the potential. He was a big lad. He had all the functional movements. He was a very good mover. He's a good jumper. He was a good runner. And as I was saying to the father, just to try and keep him on the right track, make sure he's doing all his good movements, keep him develop all the skills at home. And as such, that player's now developed on to become a senior inter-county player, whereas he wasn't even making the club team at under 12 level. So, and that all comes down to being a good mover in lots of different ways. He developed into becoming a good athletics person, and that carried across into his athletic potential once he got into the different sports as well. And then as he got to the senior age group, obviously he started to have to focus in on one sport, and GAA was a sport, and became a pivotal figure and a great player for his county also. So keep in mind that it's good to expose our children and our youth players to lots of different skills, lots of different sports, and lots of different movements, because at the end up, you're going to have a whole holistic, rounded athlete rather than a one-dimensional one. Just talking about it's the different types of strength, and strength can happen in loads of different ways, but one of the main things you need to think about is the technical competency, the plyometrics, that can be involved with it. As is talked about, the jump training, the sprinting, those are all different types and forms of strength. Reactive strength, speed strength, maximal strength, there's loads of different types of strength. But if we expose our children and our youth players to as many of those different types of strength at different times, they're going to become, by the time they come to the ages of the 16 and 17s where they're ready to use external loading, they'll be more efficient, the better movers, and ready for using those different types of loads. Whereas I have come across youth players who haven't covered the basics at a good age. They haven't been able to do resistance training with their own body weight for a number of years. And by the time they got to the ages of 16 and 17, by the time that they have been spent on Xboxes, other players have been spent doing, maybe out farming or out lifting weights or out working on out around the yards and stuff like that there, and without that is types of resistant training, whereas they're better movers, whereas the guys who have missed that period of time have limited their potential that they're going to get to. So think about those different types of strength that you can use. You can use jumping, the different types of maximal strength that you can do, and the different types of sprinting that you expose them to. And strength has been shown that it's just not something that should be developed at a later phase. Strength should be progressed from youth right through the phase, and as I showed you on the slide, a couple of slides previous, and the big letters, strength should be adapted into all age grades of all types, and it's obviously down to the coach and how they prescribe that, and how they filter that in, and how they monitor the load, and how they expose them to that. So obviously with a underage player, under 12 or under 13 or under 15, you're not going to be asking them to deadlift heavy weights, but you might ask them to do plank holds, you might ask them to do a wall sit, you might ask them to do body weight squats, you might even ask them to do jumping with weights. So that's the start of your plyometric exercises. And a lot of that's technique based, but it's also getting the body primed for moving in the correct way. All right, so if we can jump with weights or a light weight or a light load at a young age, the body is already ingrained those movement patterns that it needs to for whenever they get to elite level, elite county level. If they do squat patterns, if they're doing Olympic lifting or jumping with heavy weights, then the body already knows that it's in what type of pattern or what type of movement it should be doing. And as I touched upon, the different types of muscular strength, you've got speed, power, agility, plyometric ability, and the endurance. All of these should be dotted in at different points of a youth's career. All right, so don't be thinking that you should only be doing power, or you should only be doing agility at a 16, 17, 18-year-old level. Those should be exposed, and they can be exposed in loads of different ways, from sprinting to sprinting with a resistant band, somebody chasing after you. It could be agility, could be like cats and mice, where they're trying to evade somebody coming to catch them with the tail. So there's loads of ways we can implement that. It's just about trying to make sure that you dot them in at some point, and they're exposed to this on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. All right. As we talked about the different types of strength, these are the three main ones that I'd be focusing on, especially at once they hit puberty, is developing the power, the strength, and endurance. Or sorry, pre-puberty. Once the hypertrophy or the muscle size building, the potential to develop that before puberty is quite low, so it's not something that we're going to be working on. But obviously, once they do hit that phase where the hormones are starting to increase, then you'll be looking to increase the muscle size and the muscle density, and that will happen naturally. But also we need to take into account that limbs are growing, and that's where you can find a lot of young fellas maybe get growing pains. So if you don't develop that good core strength and the basics, we talked about the resistance training, the holding their body weight pre-puberty, well then the potential for that to happen could possibly be increased. So just bear that in mind. And And the fundamental movement skills that we talked about, and we've talked about this in the previous webinar with the fundamentals, like they all kind of interconnect, and they all kind of correlate right through the career path. So just because you do them at a fundamental age group, like under sixes, doesn't mean that you stop them or that they change too much as you develop through. So you're still looking for good running patterns, good stabilization, good manipulation. So what I'm going to show you just about, I'm going to get a bit of interaction going on in the chat box. As you can see from the picture here on the right hand side, I want you to describe to me what you think is happening here. All right, so we've obviously got two different players of different capacities, but describe to me what you're seeing. Describe to me the different abilities, and I'll just call a few of these out once they start to come in. So we've got obviously two hurlers within the Antrim, two different clubs, playing at the same age group, might add as well. But what are the main differences that we're seeing here? We're thinking that these two guys are the same age. And if you want to type into your chat bar, we'll get a bit of a, yeah, for instance, so core strength for the fellow in the blue, yeah. Player in the left, physically more developed. Kevin's come in with a good one, early developer versus the late developer. Yeah, so all good points. So I think this is an under 16 game quite a few years ago, and I have coached the wee fella on the right. So again, just thinking about the player on the left, he has probably went through that puberty phase a bit earlier. Obviously his limbs have grown, he's a bit taller, and also from the muscle definition, you can see he's probably a bit more defined. But what implication does that have for him as a player? So if you think this player, and again, put into the chat box, if you think this player, he's physically developed, he's marking somebody of that, who's beside him, who's probably not as developed, what's that going to mean for the fella in blue as a player? Vincent, probably an age gap. That's it. The two fellas in the picture are actually the same age. Well, probably about 6 months older, yeah. So yeah, Kevin's come in there. Like the fella in blue potentially could have that feeling of overconfidence. All right, so he's maybe getting into all these games. He's going to be bigger, a lot stronger than probably anybody that's marking him, and probably long term he maybe have that feeling of overconfidence. But also thinking about the psychological aspect of it in terms of his technical ability or his tactical ability, tactical awareness. The fella in blue, if he's getting things, easy, well, he's probably not getting it easy there for me, if you can see in the picture, but the guy in green's not giving him it easy, that's for sure. But if you can think he's coming up against a player, he's come up against a player who's less physically developed, is probably less, he's slower than him, he's probably not be able to jump as high as him. So if he's getting it so easy against a lot of these underage players, by the time he gets to the ages of 17 and 18, where everybody's caught up on him, he maybe will not have the psychological capacity to deal with like people who are getting the better of him, or be able to compete at the same level as him, or be able to find out, how to be technically proficient. Sean, come in. Possible functional limitations can overdevelop too quickly. Yeah, it's a good point. And he may focus on a strength asset and not develop his technique. And again, Gareth, that's just perfect. That's just exactly what I was trying to say. So we'll turn this on the flip side. The young fella on the green, what do you think the implications are for him as a player? If he's coming up against somebody who at this underage level, who's continuously, he's smaller, but he's continuously coming up against people who are bigger and stronger than him. How is that going to make him as a player? What's he going to have to do different? And again, just stick into the chat bar. Yeah, and again, he may have a lack of confidence if he is continually finding that he's not bigger or strong enough to compete with those types of people. But say if he, if he thinks, right, well, I'm just not going to be able to compete physically, how else would he have to get around, experience and come up against this type of player week on week? How is he going to develop if he's not going to be physically good? Kevin's just hit the nail on the head. Develop more evasive skills, develop the speed, and psychologically, he's going to be thinking about, I need to be thinking about rather, am I going to be fast enough? Am I going to be tall enough to jump up for compete with the ball? He is more going to be tactically and technically adapt to try and match them with the taller, stronger player. So he's going to be thinking, nearly a step or two ahead. He might be more agile. He might be thinking about how he can get the better of the bigger, stronger players. And as he progresses through his underage career, he's already going to have that mind frame, that psychological mind frame, and the technical and tactical awareness of being able to, get the better of stronger players. But as he becomes stronger and bigger, as he gets through his physical development through the years, he's going to have the best of both worlds. He's going to be physically taller and stronger, plus he's going to have that mindset, the psychological performance and tactical awareness of how he's going to improve. So, yeah. And that kind of leads me on just on to the next point, is about biobanding. So biobanding is the process of just grouping athletes based on their attributes. And a lot of sports and a lot of teams have actually started to do this within the last few years. So they're matching players from 13, 14, 15, 16 years of age together based on their physical attributes. And some of the sports and teams have started to do this. Bournemouth, Watford in the Premier League, and some of the rugby union teams as well have started to pick their teams not on age groupings, but rather their physical maturation levels. So you may have a team with maybe 4 or 5, 10 under 16s. You may have 2 or 3 under 15s. You may have 1 or 2 under 14s into it, but they're all there based on their physical ability. So they're finding out that because of that, they're able to train and put them into different scenarios where they're up against different levels of physical ability. They're on a level playing field, whereas if you can imagine this wee guy, it's as much for the younger fellas or the smaller fellas as it is for the bigger fella to help them improve, that they're on the same level playing field, both physically and tactically and technically. So that's something to even think about if you're putting players into, or some of your teams into training sessions, is to try and maybe factor in the physical ability when it comes to maybe doing certain drills or games. And how the repercussions then will have on that certain group of players. And I suppose a lot of coaches out there, you'll probably do it anyway. You'll probably try and keep the bigger fellas or the more tactically better players together to help challenge them, because as you all know, like, there's no good putting somebody who's really proficient onto somebody who's not. Neither of the two are actually going to benefit out of it. So keeping that in mind to help select through the physical abilities just as well as the rest of the technical and tactical work. And again, this all stems back onto being physically and fundamentally, proficient within your movement skills. And these are the different types of, we touched on the movement skills earlier on. The locomotive movement skills is your running, jumping, landing, crawling, sidestepping, hopping, skipping. Your body control skills into your balance, your turning, your twisting, rotating, accelerating and decelerating, and then object manipulation. So you're looking at your catching, your throwing, using the hurl, striking off both sides, bouncing. So there's an object. But the main thing is your young players need to be, before they get to the elite level or the next phase, once they come out of their puberty and into 16, 17, 18 and ready to go into senior level, they need to be able to master those fundamental movement skills before they develop too much sport specific stuff. And if I had, the way of being able to develop athletic development into all clubs and all counties, this would be like this would be key, and we emphasise right through to make sure that we're getting the end product, better players for longer. I just want you to watch the video that's coming up. There's going to be no sound with it, but What I will ask you to do is type in again to the chat box what you see, what types of movements you see, what types of athletic abilities you see. Hopefully this is playing for you all. This actually comes from a fellow in America who is an athletic development coach, very well thought of, and he has his own area, his own studio with athletic potential and based specific needs are specific games. So as you can see, a lot of emphasis is placed on strength. Easy to start there, get something to the shows. Anything else you want to see or point out? What do you see? Move abilities, move patterns. Okay, so yeah, just play it one more time. Press the screen there, click, up and landing, squat, press, and roll, throwing, and dodging. Okay, so just from the video, you can see talk about strength. Now, these guys are doing a bit of jump and land, so they're working with reactive strength. And we've got other guys here, jump levels here, external load. And what do we notice with external load is there's no huge amount of weights involved, and that's obviously based upon coaches telling them they're proficient enough to do body weight exercises, right? Exercises. Weight, right? External load, such as bar, such as just to get that movement pattern, movement patterns. So that's extra load. Yeah, so talk about all different types of movement patterns. Fade and dodge an external stimulus, and like when we think about agility, like a lot of people maybe think about agility drills where they have cones set out, whereas I would call them change of direction drills because it's a change of direction where the child or the teenager knows what way they're going to change, whereas true agility is where you're being able to change the body with speed at a quick reaction, whereas the change of direction, they know that change of direction is coming up and they can be ready for it. Whereas true agility, like you see in the dodgeball here, they don't know where the ball's coming from, so they have to move under a reaction. So keeping that in mind when you're doing your agility work as well, that you're doing it with some sort of external stimulus rather than just setting out cones and telling them to change direction. But yeah, Vincent, come in there again, like the power. So they're developing power like with the clean, the power cleans that you're using with the bar, doing their plyometrics, their jumping, leg strength, squats, upper body strength, and agility. That's good. Yeah, so as you can see, he's touched upon lots of those different elements of strength and physical ability and outputs we were talking about earlier on. And again, it's up to the coach and how he prescribes that in to his sessions. But obviously, it's not done with any huge amount of load. It's just getting proficient within their movement capacity first before he actually develops into much external stimulus or external load. Good. So lots of good conversation coming in there on the chat bar, and thanks again for your interaction. But again, this all develops down into what we're looking for in our end product. If we have good movers, like we've seen in the video there, like good power cleans, good jumpers, good landers, agile people, we're going to produce a more efficient and proficient athlete or player whenever they get to that elite level or senior level. Vincent's come in there again. Would I introduce some med ball work as well? Yeah, I totally would. Med ball throws. I would be very big on med ball throws. As I say, like it's not much of an external load. They're pretty light. You can have med balls down as far as 2 or 3 kilograms, but it's moving a light external load and getting them into that movement pattern. Yet, so I would definitely use med balls as one of my first go-to type of external loads before we would actually throw in any sort of dumbbells or plates or bars. And that just kind of leads us on nicely into age-appropriate training. So we've all heard the quote, children are not miniature adults and shouldn't be trained that way. And I would say, yeah, that's true to a certain degree. You don't want to train them like a miniature adult, but it doesn't say that, we're not allowed to, prescribe the same exercises. Like, for example, doing a back squat or a front squat, I would still prescribe, tell somebody to do it, like a teenager do a back squat or front squat, but I'd maybe tell them to do it with their body weight, get it using a brush shaft. Just to make sure that they don't have any external loading on and they're proficient within their movement before they even think about doing anything else. So say the movements and exercises can be similar to that of adults. Yep, they definitely can. The power emphasize, the power cleans, the snatch, the squats, the lunges, the bench pressing, as you've seen in the video. Yep, all the movements and exercises can be similar, but it's just in the differences in how they're coached. And how safe and appropriate it is for them. So yeah, loads of different core exercises, loads of different body weight exercises, loads of different light external loads or partner resistant exercises is key within those teenage years. And just making sure that there's a coach there, because we've all heard horror stories of kids who've gone into gyms and just thinking they should be lifting crazy weights and then getting trapped underneath the weights. That's not what, strength training should be at that particular age. But again, that message needs to come from the coach and comes from somebody who has a background and knowledge within that area. So just like I talked about, these are the foundational movement or functional movement patterns that I would be looking to implement into a training program with an underage player. A good squat, a good hinge, a good lunge, a good carry, some types of push and pull exercises, and those can be either like horizontal planes or vertical planes, and just trying to make sure you expose that to them, light loads, light exercises at different times during the week or bi-weekly. But obviously, as they go through puberty and they start to grow, obviously the potential then for them to use more external load will be increased. But that needs to be managed at a safe environment and by somebody who's proficient and certified in doing so. Just going back to some of the the foundational movement patterns, the functional movements that we're thinking about as well is the types of jumping and landing, the different types of progressions they can do. So from a young age, I'd be asking the kids to, try out some of the different types of jumping and landing. What looks good, like what can you do? How can you develop that? How can you make it harder? And these are just some progressions and regressions. And, this is kind of taken from obviously the fundamental age group, and you can see the age group of the kids here, but the same emphasis still applies. I would still implement some of that into my warm-ups at the underage teams. But again, like how can you challenge that? Can you add in an external stimulus? Can you make it harder for them in certain ways? So yeah, thinking about that, jumping and landing regressions and through your warm-ups too. And then the landing technique we talked about, is the jumping and landing. This is for you as coaches, keeping an eye out for good alignment, knees in line with the toes rather than knees buckling in. So that's one thing we want to be thinking about. Have we got good alignment, good movement patterns? And that all goes back to what we talked about previous as well. Are you proficient within your movement? Are you proficient within your jumping and landing and squatting and lunging and all of those things? So yeah, just moving on then from our squat or jumping and landing technique, and that's very similar into the squatting technique as well, but moving into thinking about the different types of running. Here's some tips on acceleration running, getting them into a seated march, marching in the spot, walking marches, coordinating arms and legs, and then stage 4, where we're looking at maintaining technique and developing into a high speed environment. So thinking about all those types of things, but all going back to the same point. Are they good movers? Does it look good? Are we hitting the right targets, in terms of their arms, their limbs, their core and the posture? And if something doesn't look good, then just kind of give the coach them their spot and fix technique. And then if you need to, you need to go back to your regressions. And here's just like we were thinking about acceleration, the most amount of types of running, the most amount of high intensity runs start off with like an acceleration phase. So acceleration, you think about a car coming from a stop start, it needs to accelerate to get up to top speed. So we need to do the same as athletes or as players. So keeping an emphasis on the acceleration is key, because a lot of players, especially backs, full backs, full forwards, will end up be coming out of that, close to a stop position as possible, or like a walk and start. Whereas midfielders and middle third players will probably on the go a lot more and not get to acceleration. They'll be probably still staying at top speed. Whereas you might find that a lot of the inside players will be getting a lot more exposure to acceleration. So that's why it's key to coach through acceleration. And those are some of the wee points that you might want to coach into your warm-ups down on the left-hand side there. So the different types of wall marches: 1 touch, 2 touch, 2-point starts, 3-point starts, and then starting from various positions. Can you get up and accelerate from your knees? Can you accelerate from lying on your back? And I can think of a few examples where players have even in last week's games, National League, players have been handed a ball or hand passed the ball in a kneeling position, or like whenever they were in possession of the ball, they were still in possession when they hit the ground from a tackle. They were able to get up, or roll away, and get into that acceleration and get away from their players. So yet exposing them to the different types of positions and starts that they might be in during the game. And then just some common errors. Again, you're just looking at alignment. Does the body look in line? Is there a straight line, or is the back curved? So ideally, we want to see is what's happening on the right-hand side. There's a nice alignment between the head, shoulders, hips, down to the feet. We'll call that as the power line. If it's more so what's happening on the left-hand side, well, then there's power being dispersed somewhere else, or it's been lost. So, yep, good alignment is key if we want to develop the potential for accelerating and running faster. And that all comes down to being ingrained at that younger age. So the more we can coach at a younger age, the potential then for the faster that we can become once the body start to change. And then agility. These are just some of the things that we're talking about earlier on, like the acceleration, the agility, the jump and land, and those are all the exposures that we're going to find in the game. So it's, again, trying to make sure that we implement those into our training sessions on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And again, looking from the video, you can see change the direction as well as agility. So they're trying to find new spaces, getting into it as quick as they can and be ready for the next ball. So there's an element of change of direction, and there's an element of agility into that as well. So again, down the left-hand side, you see all the different progressions and regressions that might want to, and that starts from hard or easiest to the bottom, which will be the hardest. And this is just an exercise table which I've got from another athletic development coach. And down the left-hand side, you can see there the different levels. So obviously level 1 being the most basic, to level 6 being the hardest. And along the top, then you can see the different movement patterns. So you get a squat pattern, a hinge pattern, a press, a pull, core, sagittal plane cores, different types of core exercises, carrying exercises. So this is a good wee matrix or a continuum that you can look to see if you can find progression or regression, or if you need a certain player to, he's really good at doing his body weight squats, what's the next thing that you move on to? Oh, right, we'll move them on to a goblet squat. So again, this is again down to the coach, your coaching now, and be able to see, is there athletes or children or teenagers or whatever within your sessions, are they proficient in doing something? Well, is there something that I can give them to give them a better stimulus or make it harder for them to help them develop? Because at the end of the day, what you're looking for is everybody to develop, and everybody will develop at their own rate. So it's just making sure that we have an idea of what to move on to or what to regress back to if they need to do that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I've just gone roughly about an hour there, and I'll finish off with the last slide. And it's something that I've always said. It's easier to build strong children than it is to prepare broken adults. And going back to the pyramid that we used before, we do need to be as proficient and efficient within their movement and coordination, and developing that along with good levels of strength all right through the age groups, we can develop more faster and explosive and hopefully injury-free players for the future. So I think that's it. If anybody has any questions they would like me to answer, you can put your hand up, or you can put it into the chat bar, and I'll maybe get you to unmute yourself if you want. We have quite a few on this evening, so don't be shy, and you can ask your questions away, and I'll try and answer them.